This episode is sponsored by Well Balanced Nutrition and 360 Health.
Welcome to the Health Geeks Book Club podcast. Listen in as Kristen Norton and Eleanor Russell review all those great health and wellness books you've been wanting to read or you have read and want to talk about. Here's Kristen and Eleanor.
So, what have you seen on TikTok or Instagram lately? What kind of craziness?
I don't want to be on social media. I'm trying to be away from social media. But I have seen Instagram. I have not fallen down the TikTok hole.
I haven't either, but a lot of people do get their information from TikTok or Instagram. Well, the trouble is that anybody and everybody can share information on TikTok or Instagram, and often they do with complete and
reckless abandon. And overly confident people that may have success with one health or wellness strategy then tout that is the way to go. And there's some wellness influencers that have such a wide audience and are not always sharing the most evidence-based ideas. So you know us, we're the Health Geeks. We're talking about our next book, which is Saturated Facts, a myth-busting guide to diet and nutrition in a world of misinformation by Dr. Ids. Tired of feeling stuck in your health journey? At Well Balanced Nutrition, we understand that achieving your health goals isn't just about what you eat. It's about overcoming the mental roadblocks holding you back. Our team of expert nutrition coaches is here to guide you every step of the way, helping you break through mindset barriers and reach your full potential. Don't let mindset barriers stand in the way of your health and happiness. Call Well Balanced Nutrition today and start your journey to a better you. Yeah, so Dr. Ids says he's an NHS doctor and a TikTok star. I mean, he says that on the front of the book, and I'm thinking, ooh, that's cool. This book was published in 2024 by Penguin Life, which is an imprint of Penguin Random House, which I think is a substantial publishing house. So kudos for getting through that process. Kristen, did you look up his credentials?
He's a UK-trained physician.
Yeah, I tried to look that up because it was hard to find. Usually on Wikipedia, you can find a list of things about people, and I looked on Google. I was not able to find much about where did he get his credentials and stuff, but he says he's an MBBS, an MRes, and a DIP-BLM. And I thought, now those are kind of fun to know about. The BBS is a Bachelor of Medicine, Bachelor of Surgery, and it's equivalent to the American MD.
Okay.
As I understand it. The MRes is a Master of Research, which is required postgraduate. So you have to be beyond your professional degree to get that. And then International Board of Lifestyle Medicine. And he says he's a lifestyle medicine guy. And I said, well, that's kind of cool. I want to know more about that. And he talks about how we're farther ahead here in the United States than they are in the UK, which I'm not sure that's true, but maybe. And what it seems to be for that one, though, is it requires a master's or a doctorate in health or allied medicine. But then when I looked at the curriculum, it looked like it was just a continuation of CMEs, and if you did 12 of them, you could maybe take a little test and get that credential. So I don't know how rigorous the lifestyle medicine thing is, but it does require that underpinning of the formal education. So he's 28 years old. Young dude, and he's going for the young market, which I don't know a lot of us my age are not on TikTok.
So yeah, I'm not, but I am on Instagram, and he originally caught my eye there, where he would show a clip of an influencer confidently sharing some misinformation, and then he'd say, "Time for school," and he would proceed to share evidence to why this information was either false or only half true or just misleading in some way. And then he always ends his video with class dismissed. And so he has this really fun approach and, does a good job of distilling, hey, these are the facts. This is why this is not accurate, or look out for this. And I appreciate that. And he found that that's what made him go viral and become, I guess, TikTok famous, because he would debunk all of these myths.
And I think he started this because he was finished his education as COVID hit the world.
Yes.
And he developed he was paying attention to social media because I guess he was bored. And then he said, I'm going to react to some of it. And so he started his social media career. And I think the book is a distillation of some of those conversations he's had or provocative topics that have come up in his social media discourse.
Yeah, and his social media is really entertaining, and I highly recommend following him because it does help you look out for the misinformation and just clarify things. But the book is really where the gems are. He doesn't really...
Well, it's organized.
It's organized. He gets into what you really need to pay attention to. And he did his... he started on social media, too, because the lifestyle medicine was his interest. And like other authors, he was like, you don't really get that in med school as much as I wanted to learn about, more nutrition, more lifestyle. And so that's, I think, why he went down that extra route and why these topics are important to him.
Yeah, and to reach the audience, because he says he's more in wants to practice more in the preventive side of the health conversation. He appreciates sick care, but he wants to be on the side that keeps you healthy longer.
Right.
And I think, there's a lot of interest in that right now, is if we can avoid medical intervention by lifestyle intervention, maybe that would be a good thing for all of us to pay attention to. I will say that we've read Robert Davis's book, The Healthy Skeptic. He has written a couple of books. Dr. Cheney, we read his Busting the Myths of Supplements and Foods and Diets and all that kind of stuff. So there are a few other authors out there that are doing the same kind of critical read of the scientific literature and then trying to interpret it for the rest of us. But as I was reflecting on this book this morning, I thought, I'm kind of tired of little bullet things telling me what to do, like don't eat fat, do eat salt, drink green tea, exercise, do yoga, do kickboxing, whatever, lift weights. Since I'm an educator, I always enjoy, let's have the context of those comments and then really see if that makes sense rather than just knee-jerking because somebody said it. And it's a trend, as you were talking about earlier, the trend market. So as a preface, as we get into this, I would also say I ran into a little bit of controversy with Dr. Idds. I don't know if you bumped into it, but it seems like in 2023, the FDA issued a letter to him with concerns over his connection to the American Beverage Board and not disclosing that with his recommendations. So there's a couple of other physicians that are tackling him in the social net thing. And it's like, well, at least he's irked somebody. He's getting attention. He's got conversation going. So let's dig into this book and see what we think about it.
Yeah. So, before we dig in, I thought it was interesting. We've read a book by the Glucose Goddess is what she calls herself online. And while that book did have some interesting strategies, The Glucose Revolution, the author, in my opinion, has shared very misleading info, and he has called her out several times for that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the book is divided into 3 parts. Part 1, he addresses diet myths. Part 2, myths about inflammation and weight loss. And then 3, he shares some of the latest science on things like chrononutrition, gut microbiome health, and brain health.
Yeah, and those are kind of outlined on the cover of the book, so you kind of know where he's going to go with that. He has a great bibliography. I've appreciated the fact that he footnoted things. I've kind of commented on other authors not doing that. He did. He gave me the source of his information, and I could look at it and decide if I wanted to pursue it any further or if I thought it was worth pursuing. He also has a really interesting chart of the hierarchy of research, which is a fundamental thing that he's saying about when you hear someone tell you their report from a research thing, you got to pay more attention to that, what that means, because it depends on the quality of the research or the design or whatever, so on. And I had a few comments about that chart that I would also add. And I also was disappointed in the ending of his book. I thought he didn't know how to end it, so he just kind of ended it, and it's like, oh, come on. But yeah, it's what I did like about it. He takes a topic, discusses it, develops it, and then he says, "Here's my bottom line." And so you can, if you want to do a quick read through here, you can just go hit the bottom lines. And then at the end of his sort of chapter, he gives you the key takeaways. And I like that because it's a good summary piece to go back and say, oh, yeah, I missed that. I'm glad he pointed that out again. So I like the structure of the book. And it was a fun read. I enjoyed reading it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did too. And there were some interesting points to me that I think we can discuss as we go. But he digs in with understanding understanding weight gain, and goes into the fact that there are two main theories that scientists go by: the carbohydrate insulin model and the energy balance model. Both of these theories propose that weight change happens based on the law of thermodynamics. Mm-hmm. So if you consume more energy or calories than you burn, you will gain weight. So he kind of compares these two, and he calls out that, some people will say that eating carbohydrates stops your body from burning fat, no matter how few calories you eat. And this is not accurate. But you'll hear it from people who promote keto or low carb. So I thought he did a really great job of explaining what is actually happening. So according to this carbohydrate insulin model, eating carbohydrates leads to hormonal and cellular changes that make you eat more, and therefore you gain weight. It's not that it stops you from burning fat.
Which is what I was saying about, these bullet things that people throw out there. You've got to understand the whole body,
right,
or as much as we know about it, because these things don't work in isolation.
Exactly.
It's just like not a single element. It's a whole body interaction. You tick off one thing, well, something else in the system's going to have a signal from that and may respond.
And I think that theme is throughout this book, different topics. So he says, if carbs really were the problem, then wouldn't vegetarians and vegans, who typically rely much more on carbohydrate-rich foods, wouldn't they all be a higher weight and have heart disease and diabetes? And they typically don't. So he's saying we don't have to fear carbohydrates, and understand both of those theories when you're talking about what makes us gain weight. Mm-hmm. Then he moves into one of the most popular diets that when I reached out to the Well Balanced tribe, they said they wanted to hear about. So that is, one of them is the keto diet. Keto diet.
Boy, is that a popular diet. There are a lot of people that are swearing by that and doing it. I also think he says in here about diets is many of them can work to help you lose weight.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but maintaining it, sustaining it, different stories.
Absolutely.
Okay, so
I agree. As you just mentioned, keto is effective in the short term. And we know that in 6 to 12 months of starting that diet, we tend to see weight loss, decreased blood pressure, and other beneficial biomarkers change. However, at 12 months of the same diet, we don't see that same effect after 12 months. So it just kind of levels off. And then most people have a hard time sticking to a keto diet. There are some people that they're pretty solid on it long term, but I would say the majority of them struggle to do it as an ongoing thing. And so then the risk you see is your weight coming back on really quickly once you decide to include more carbs.
You mean a dieting cycle?
A weight, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Where you cycle
weight
back
yo-yoing.
and forth, yeah. The body has these, what we call homeostasis systems, that keep things sort of constant so that the cell can function properly. And I always kind of wonder about a state that we would call a pathological state, which would be ketosis, which can lead to a coma at some level, so regulating yourself through this seems to be a little more complex than I think the general public appreciates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, yes, there are many pathways that you can get energy from. You can get it through the carboxylic acid cycle, and you can enter that with a glucose molecule, or you can come in a little bit later with a byproduct of a protein, which is what the keto thing is doing, the fat access. They're places to access that energy production system, but they're metabolic byproducts from that the cell has to accommodate. So I this idea of good and bad eating too is in there, and I think anytime we label food as good or bad, I'm not happy with that.
Absolutely. And I'm really glad to see that in here, because I was a little bit fearful that with it's just a medical approach that maybe he didn't understand that nuance of your relationship with food. But he did. He called it out. And he says we could save ourselves a lot of time and money and stress by learning how to incorporate more nutritious sources of carbohydrates into our diet and finding a balance. Mm-hmm. So he, bottom line, says keto is not a sustainable, sensible approach for most people. And it comes with the risk of weight regained. And then he also saw that among women who were at a normal weight and they did keto, they actually had increased risk of cardiovascular disease from being on it.
One of the things he says is that I agree with, the most serious consequence is your effect on your liver. And I love my liver.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people don't appreciate their liver. It is a great thing, but that's where your fat metabolism goes on.
It's your detoxer.
And so you can negatively impact the functioning of your liver by overworking it. Mm-hmm. And that then relates to the cardiovascular thing because it upsets the LDLs and HDL balances because those are fats, lipoproteins.
Yes. And he said one study that we have that does look at it long term, it looked at people for over a decade, and those who were following low-carb diets had 22% risk of earlier death, 35% risk of cardiovascular disease, and 8% increased risk of cancer. And he suggests the reason could be the increased saturated fats.
Mm-hmm. So it's not an optimal diet for long-term health. Yeah. Okay. So we agree with him.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I didn't read anything in there that went against anything else I have
absolutely
been willing to incorporate in my belief system.
Yeah.
What about
I've got one more. Intermittent fasting.
And this idea of calorie restriction, which I think is kind of fun to talk about.
Yeah.
Because I don't like the idea. I really don't like that idea. I love calories.
I know. I don't like it either. Okay, so yes, intermittent fasting is another one that's gaining popularity, and there's many different types.
Didn't we read about that in the Blue Zone? It seems like we came down to those Greek monks that were out there not eating for 16 hours.
Oh.
And they had a routine of what they ate and how it worked for them. And it was like, intermittent fasting. And then they came up with a recommendation, I think, in the cookbook on that if you wanted to follow it.
Okay. Yeah, you're probably right. I have a vague
recollection.
Mm-hmm. But usually the most standard of intermittent fasting that I see is like a 4 to 8 hour eating window. And then the rest of the time, you're refraining from any calories, maybe drinking coffee or water. And when compared to other diets, it was not more or less effective for weight loss. So it can be helpful. Like in my practice, I see that like for some, just knowing, all right, it's a easy decision. I'm not eating after this point. And that can help some people from like mindlessly snacking. And it works. But I think the other challenge is like, well, what about family dinners and work? Like, how do you manage those social aspects of eating? That could be the tricky part, in my opinion, of intermittent fasting. So he suggests that for the most part, intermittent fasting is just helping you with calorie restriction, and that's why it's beneficial.
Yeah, and then that takes us back to that book that we both enjoyed called The Switch, because what you're doing in that non-eating portion of your 24-hour cycle is allowing autophagy to occur.
Which is?
The cleanup of the cell, basically, the repair, the restoration. And if we don't give ourselves time to do that, then some of these sludgy products build up inside the cell cytoplasm, and it's difficult then for the cell to function properly. And then you get reversible damage for a while, and then it becomes irreversible. So protecting that with giving your body time to recover. Something that we don't, in America, we're on all the time. On. And so then we're maybe not eating properly or with the frequency, and then we end up eating late at night. Those sorts of things happen as behaviors because of the social pressures that we find ourselves in and the inability to say, I'm not going to do that. I'm down now. I'm resting. And we read a book about rest, how important that is.
Yeah.
Oh, in this same thing about the intermittent fasting, though, that I found interesting was he was also discussing the IGF-1, which is glucose factor 1. I can't remember what the I stands for. Do you? I got it. Insulin-like growth factor. There we go. Insulin-like growth factor. And it says in here, studies in rodents, which he also picks apart in his discussion of what literature are you referencing? Who was the subject? Was it an animal or a person? And so the rodent studies, the animal studies don't hold as high a level of evidence to him as the human population studies. But anyway, so studies in rodents have shown that fasting for more than 24 hours can reduce levels of the insulin-like growth factor. And it's interesting because lowering this encourages the body to make more stem cells, which could potentially be helpful in managing cancer. Regular calorie restriction without fasting doesn't seem to have the same impact on IGF unless protein is also reduced in the diet, which, we're hearing a lot about, are we getting enough protein? And so my thing about calorie restriction is if you cut the calories back, how do you get the diversity of food in your system to deliver all those daily minimal requirements?
It's super tough.
And so with the keto diet, one of the things they did talk about in here was that you can have nutrient deficiencies, particularly with vitamins B and C, and probably other ones as well. So I think supplementation would be critical in a keto diet. And I have friends that are doing carnivore diets. And I don't know that, did he talk about carnivore diet?
He did.
Oh, okay. Hey, if you're as interested in prevention as I am, contact me, Eleanor Russell, at 360health, 4u.com. Whether you're interested in financial wellness or physical health products, 360 Health invites you to become part of our community.
Well, he says that another interesting thing about intermittent fasting is that it might be really helpful for men in particular who have prediabetes. So there was a very small study of men who were randomized into a 6-hour feeding window that ended before 3 p.m. or a 12-hour feeding window that included eating late into the evening.
There we go, that timing of eating.
Yeah. So the study found that those who stopped eating at 3 p.m. had improved insulin sensitivity, beta cell responsiveness, blood pressure, oxidative stress, and reduced appetites, and that these results were independent of weight loss. So their goal was to keep them at the same weight, but see if there were benefits to one eating window over the other. And the earlier eating window had better glucose results, basically.
Right, which he says this new field of chrononutrition is coming along, and he's very excited about that, and I am too. And I think even the glucose goddess, as flawed as she may be, kind of brought up that idea about timing as well. So I think it's a new concept for nutritionists to be thinking about, and then the rest of us to hear about from you guys.
Totally.
And because nutrition research is tough. It's not an easy, you can't control all the variables. When you have interventional studies where I can be in a lab and I can control what goes into the system and measure what comes out, it's hard to do with people that are living in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not, we expect a lot from you nutrition folks, but I think that maybe we have to be more patient.
Yeah, I get upset when, we think one thing from the evidence that we have and then new evidence appears and the media makes it sound like it's like back and forth. But if you're really following the research, we're just learning a little bit at a time.
Yeah, and he didn't talk to that as much as I wanted him to, the idea of forgiveness and the idea that, like he's saying, this is the way it is. This is what we know. But he doesn't make that clear that this could change as we learn more. And I always like that tack on. This is what we know today, but, it's the best we can do today.
With the evidence we have at this point.
Yeah.
Well, I'd be remiss to not say that intermittent fasting is not great if you have any tendency for disordered eating or a poor relationship with food, because it is often associated with worsening those.
Yeah. Yep, I would agree with you. The myth there was intermittent fasting is just calorie restriction, and it's not.
There's other benefits that we see. Yeah.
Right.
So then he kind of moves on. Well, any other diet myths that were really...
The carnivore diet,
Oh,
since I brought it up.
yes. Okay.
Yeah, so the burgers, the patties, the eggs, the cheese, the steak dripping with butter, sign me up. Yep, I'm there. It sounds good to me. Think of it as ketogenic diet on steroids.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found interesting in here was there was some proponent of this, Sean Baker, who released the book called The Carnivore Diet in 2018. And then you read a little further and it says, and I probably should mention that the New Mexico Medical Board revoked Baker's medical license in 2017, the year before the book came out. Mm-hmm. So it makes you kind of say, should I listen to this guy or should I read it with some caution?
Yeah.
Anyway, he kind of debunks it, doesn't he?
He does. He debunks that. He debunks, I've heard a lot of people here online. I think it's Dr. Gundry or maybe another
Online doc.
That's like tomatoes are bad and beans are bad. And he debunks that and explains why.
Yeah, because the lectins that are in there before they're cooked. Cooking will denature them. But anyway.
Yeah, so we won't share all of these things, but it's very interesting how he goes through each one and basically provides a research reference for each reason why.
Yeah.
So he's a proponent of the Mediterranean diet. Myth number 7 is that it's overhyped, and he says no, there's very little negative to say about the Mediterranean diet apart from its potential to be expensive, which is true. But it's a fantastic health-promoting dietary pattern and encompasses most of the dietary principles for preventative health we discuss in this book.
Yep.
If I was going to do one, it would be the Mediterranean.
Well, and it's what I kind of balk at there, Tim, is if I was going to do one, Kristen and I are trying to say we've got to find a way that we adopt a lifestyle that continues for years, and it's not going to be over.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to do it, and I offer some of my wellness community triggers to just start a conversation with them, like a 5-day challenge or a 30-day challenge. And I've told you I'm not a fan of those because that implies that after 30 days you can quit doing what we're doing.
Right.
And I don't want that. I want us to say, I like this so much, I want to keep doing it. So, but it is a way to at least address it and get an interest point to say, are you thinking about this idea of a healthy lifestyle, and how can we learn habits that will lead us into that? So, doing one, which one was the one you said you might?
The Mediterranean.
Yeah, and you can do that long term.
Right.
Yeah. I did the Atkins. I did it, lost probably 50 pounds, and kept it off for a good while until once it starts, then there's no turning back. I went probably a year after that without gaining my weight back. But when it started, it was just a slide.
Slippery slope.
Yeah, I feel like that's what we see in the research is that short term, a year after, we can maintain it.
And I always advocate that I am a carnivore.
And I like... You got the teeth for it.
Yes, and my eyes are in my front of my head. But even I, and my quote-unquote aversion to vegetables, got tired of that really fast. I'm like, I need some vegetables. I need something. I need a salad of something. But, while I was in the
Atkins
world, I couldn't do that. And,
Which again, I think is a caution. Whenever there's you can't do something, limitation in any of these programs, oh man, that's the hole you're falling in, because you're saying no to yourself, and it's like, well, I might really like that. And then all of a sudden, you got to have it,
It puts it on a pedestal. Like if you never made it off limits, you might care less about it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's our psychology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so other things really
You want to talk
briefly worth mentioning.
blood type? Weren't you your group interested in that one?
Yep, blood test. The blood type was a book that came out.
I've got it.
Do you? Yeah. And I've been asked about this one. And he says, so it's like, if you're type O, you should eat seafood, broccoli, red meat, and perform high-intensity aerobic exercise. And type A should consume vegetable, pineapple, olive oil, and soy to achieve the same effect. And he says, let's just end this here and now. A systematic review in 2013 scoured the depths of medical journals to find any evidence for efficacy of this diet and came up with nothing.
And can I say he holds the systematic review as the highest level of evidence?
Yeah. And more recently, studies in the last 10 years show that adherence to the blood type diet can improve certain health markers, but those benefits are completely unrelated to what your blood type is. So the bottom line is, yeah, you're eating more broccoli, which can improve your health, and those other healthy things, they're going to have some benefits, but it's not because of your blood type.
Yeah.
So,
well, I wanted to take on the alkaline foods are better, because I ran into some people selling all this alkaline water, and my husband had cancer, and so there was the idea that if you drank this alkaline water, it would help the cancer. And I kept saying, I don't understand that, because in my body, I've got lungs and kidneys. And I have blood, and my blood has to stay within a very narrow pH range of 7.4 or something like that.
And it's pretty good at doing that for you, or you would die.
These two systems are going to counter anything I throw in my gut, because if I drink a bucket of vinegar, which is acidic, I'm going to be blowing off some carbon dioxide and peeing out some hydrogen ions, because I can't tolerate that. So and he agrees with me. He says, yeah, no. Bottom line, if you're considering rejecting evidence based on medical therapies in favor of the alkaline diet as a treatment for cancer, just don't. And I went, yeah, that was the opinion I came to maybe 12 years ago. While there's some evidence that certain diets can slow the progression of cancer or work as a supervised adjuvant treatment with chemotherapy, diet cannot cure cancer. Many people could benefit from increasing their fruit and vegetable intake, but that has nothing to do with alkalinity. So thank you, Dr. Ids.
That's right. So let's jump to part 2 on inflammation, where he dives into topics like seed oils. This is huge right now.
And jumping a little bit ahead, but coming back to this, just as groundwork, inflammation is a natural part of our immune system. And we have acute inflammation and something called chronic, which means it goes on for a long time. Acute inflammation is appropriate
and good.
Yes,
it helps
we want
us
it.
Heal.
We want the immune system to do all those things. We just don't want them to keep doing them over and over and over when they don't need to, when they're not triggered to it. So anyway, what does he say about seed oils?
So he says that it's easy to formulate a pseudoscientific case against omega-6 fats or polyunsaturated fatty acids, which are found in these seed oils. All you have to do is reference a couple of rodent studies, rat studies again, from 50 years ago, not revealing to your audience that they were conducted on rats, of course. Use glittery chemical language and sprinkle over the usual conspiracy thinking that our ancestors supposedly thrived on saturated fats and nothing else. But closer inspection begins to illuminate the collection of standalone, unsubstantiated claims upon which their argument rests. So what people typically say is that our body converts some of this. Okay, let me start over. The omega-6 inflammation scare is based on the hypothesis that the body converts the most common omega-6 fatty acid, linoleic, into another type of fatty acid called arachidonic acid. And that has been implicated in increasing the number of pro-inflammatory cytokines in the body.
Yeah, and I first ran into that conversation with Floyd Chilton, who's here in Winston-Salem and wrote that marvelous book, maybe 15 or 20 years now, called Inflammation Nation, and was talking about how when we were feeding fish in a farm pond, corn, which is something they don't normally eat, we're stimulating the inflammatory response in them and creating the arachidonic acids. And then we're eating those thinking we're protecting our heart. And then he made a pretty convincing thing about how it is an inflammation kicker. And Dr. Idds is saying it's not that important.
Yeah, he says the conversion process has only been demonstrated in animal studies. And people have inappropriately attributed these effects to humans. The body doesn't convert much linoleic acid into arachidonic acid.
Which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, because the process is highly inefficient. And then he says we have bucket loads of data showing that increasing levels of linoleic acid by over 500% or decreasing levels by 90% has no meaningful effect on the arachidonic acid levels in the plasma, serum, or red blood cells.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Did you look up the article that was from?
Not that one.
It was number 1, right? Increasing dietary linoleic acid does not increase tissue arachidonic acid in adults consuming Western-type diets, a systematic review, and it was in Nutrition and Metabolism in 2011. So that's kind of old, really.
It is kind of old. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, so maybe I don't know.
So we might want to look at that article too, because let me go there now. The systematic review as the highest level of evidence. That is a very interesting thing. What you do is you go to your libraries and you look up you do a literature search on your keywords, and you find all the articles ever published on whatever you're interested in. And then you have screening criteria that you select from that body of literature. And so you eliminate like if this study in that collection was done on 3 people and your criteria is it has to be a population study, you eliminate it. So you go through an elimination process and you get down to a critical mass of literature that you are willing to say meets your evidence criteria level. So there can be variances in that. And so you really kind of even need to look at the systematic review of literature to see what did they eliminate and retain in their process. So
that's true. Just because it is the highest level, it doesn't always make it perfect.
It still has the ability to be, I won't say bias, but maybe at some level, the design is what you need to look at. Is the design acceptable to what you're trying to make, the point? So, yeah, you can go down that hole, but that's what we expect these science teams to be doing and then letting us know. And when you read the systematic review, they'll tell you what that criteria is.
And this is why we need to have caution when we just see someone on the internet saying, I did my research. Because you know what? I tried to look up some of these studies, and I don't have access to them on JAMA unless I pay.
Exactly.
So I know the lay person is not going through more than an abstract.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I appreciate the level of evidence this book took to review. I want to, before we move on, say that he says a recent meta-analysis of 83 controlled human studies carried out by his university confirms seed oils are not bad for you. They took various studies undertaken on people both with and without inflammatory bowel disease and found that increasing omega-3, omega-6, or total polyunsaturated fat acid intake had either little or no effect on inflammatory markers or risk of disease.
And I think they're probably looking at CRP, right?
That's one of them they typically look at.
Yeah. So the cooking thing was where I wanted to go. The major cooking oils were tested, including canola, peanut, corn oil, and were all found to be more effective at reducing the total and LDL cholesterol compared to butter and lard. So those are, cardiovascular issues, not necessarily inflammatory, like irritable bowel or something, but your cardiovascular stuff, the seed oils are better than your fats and your lard.
For cardiovascular health.
You're right.
Yes.
And I have been kind of leaning away from them because I've heard I'm supposed to eat all these unsaturated fats. Leaning towards the saturated fats because some evidence that they're not that bad for you. But I think maybe I need to revise that.
Can one or both of you explain to me the difference between a saturated fat and unsaturated
Yes,
fat,
I
and
can.
and why I should care one way or another about that? I've heard it my entire life, and I've never understood it. And truthfully, I've never. I mean, I could research it myself, but I want to hear either a nutritionist or a wellness person tell me what these things are and why.
I'll start to answer, and maybe Kristen can finish it. Chemically, your fats are carbohydrate chains,
Okay.
and they have a carbon bond backbone, and then they've got a hydrogen ion on each of their bonding sites. And if they don't have a full complement, they get a double bond, and they would be unsaturated. As long as there are no double bonds between the carbons, you're getting a saturated fat. And so those saturated fats at room temperature tend to be solid, and your unsaturated are liquid. So it's a chemical structural distinguish between whether they have a full load of hydrogen or not.
Right. So I think of the word saturated. There's no more room.
Yeah, the bonds are saturated, the carbon bonds.
Yes.
They're full.
So what is an example of either?
Well, if you have a monounsaturated fatty acid, there's only one of those bonds that's missed. So there's just
Like
a single.
olive oil.
They're all there except for one hydrogen, and that would be an olive oil. And then you can have a PUFA, a polyunsaturated fatty acid, which there are many of those holes in the carbon bonds.
Like your seed oils.
Yeah. So MUFAs and PUFAs.
And then your saturated fats are butter, lard, and
Solid.
coconut oil.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so are we saying coconut oil is not good for you?
Well, it's a saturated fat, and the discussion is, should we have saturated fat in our diet or unsaturated? And one of the arguments about saturated fat that I heard was when you heat it, you get a medium chain fatty acid. And so it's the medium chain things that can be good, or that's kind of where I go off the rails. Do you have anything to offer about medium chains? Because they also talk about trans unsaturated fats. Well, he says, however, in everyday cooking like pan frying or roasting, the conversion process to trans fat just won't happen. You're not exposing the oil to high enough temperatures, nor are you cooking them for long enough for trans fats to form. For the vast majority of home cooking, it is not something to worry about, which I thought was kind of gracious. So in the cookbook that we read by Saman Norsrat, she has a finger-licking fried chicken recipe that I kind of wondered, should we have that recipe in here? And he said, probably so. It's not going to be in there long enough to really hurt you. But I would say commercial cooking and everyday cooking may be different.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
and so that's what I was saying. If you're cooking at home, I would go with what he says here. But I'm not sure how long they leave things in the oils in commercial cooking.
And how many times they reuse the oil.
Yeah, so I would just he didn't put that caution in there, but I would have.
But bottom line, polyunsaturated fatty acids, omega-6, and seed oils are not inflammatory, nor is there strong evidence that they're a contributor to chronic disease.
I like it.
So, I mean, a previous book we read called Good Energy, she was saying all kinds of terrible things about the toxic seed oils. So I think this is the most up-to-date information that we should go by.
Well, I also say if we're making a salad dressing at home with a quarter cup of oil, if we're serving 12 people, you know, I mean, a tablespoon of oil on for salad dressing goes a long way. 2 tablespoons goes for a family. So how much of this, you know, are you bringing in? Now, we know that fat is calorie dense. It is the most calorie dense of the macronutrients. So if we're on a calorie restriction concept, you do want to pay attention to your fat intake. But on the omegas, are we going to get to more omega discussion?
No, so go ahead and share what you want.
Well, just the 6 and 3 conversation.
Oh, the balance of those. Yeah, go for it.
Well, he says to close off one final point, what about the 3 to 6 omega ratio, which I think we should pay attention to. Let's see what he says. It's also true that having higher tissue levels of omega 3 to 6 is beneficial. However, there's little evidence to suggest that either serum levels or dietary levels have much of an influence on tissue levels.
Yeah. So that's another thing that, to be honest, like a year or two ago, I was teaching in my anti-inflammatory nutrition class is that you got to be careful with this balance. And he's saying...
So he's saying it's got to be well-balanced?
Gotta be well balanced. So we're worrying too much about these oils.
Maybe, but over here in the dairy conversation, it comes up again where he's talking about in 2020 to 25, the American Dietary Guidelines recommend limiting saturated fat intake to less than 10% of the total calories per day. But hold the phone. Dairy also contains beneficial short-chain fatty acids that I was just talking about.
There you go.
And other nutrients that are strongly associated with heart and metabolic benefits. Doesn't that directly contradict what we know about saturated fats? So there we go. I'm kind of liking the short chains.
There we go. What about sugar?
What about sugar?
Is sugar always inflammatory? Is sugar so bad we need to avoid it?
What do you think?
Well, there was a really interesting study that this is one of them that I was able to look up.
Okay.
It was fascinating, so I'd like to share with y'all. It was an American study of 41 overweight men and women, and they increased their sugar consumption to 175 grams a day for 10 weeks. So that's 70% of your, of which more than 70% was sugary drinks.
Yeah.
Okay, so 175 grams of sugar a day, mostly coming from sugary drinks. What do you guess? Like inflammatory markers off the charts or no? At the end of the trial, the 3 key inflammatory markers had increased by only 13%, 5%, and 6%. So in reality, it wasn't that much, a tiny amount, he says. So to put this into perspective, the equivalent of 4 cans of full sugar cola a day increased CRP, which is one of the inflammatory markers, from 1.8 milligrams per liter to 1.9 milligrams per liter, which is negligible. Oh, okay. I didn't look this one up, but he says analysis of 13 studies addressed the effect of different types. So whether it's fructose, sucrose, or glucose, and what effect they have on biomarkers of inflammation. And the findings say sugar was inherently inflammatory. If sugar was inflammatory, we would have seen consistent increases in these inflammatory markers across different demographics and populations, and they didn't find any difference between fructose, glucose, or sucrose. And the total effects were very small.
Well, here's where I think that controversy that I mentioned at the beginning, where he is paid by the American Beverage Association, is an interesting comment because the cans of soda are American beverages. And then he also has a conversation later in the book about the microbiome and artificial sweeteners in the gut. And he talks about aspartame and how it's okay. And maybe, I don't know. He says it's okay. The World Health Organization calls it a potential carcinogen, and I think the FDA gave it a generally regarded as safe definition, which means we're going to put it on the market, and then if it hurts you, we'll pull it off the market. So it's still in a who knows state. My whole argument about the sugar and forticating it, like, that sounds like, yeah, go ahead and drink your soda, guys. It's okay. It's not going to hurt you. I think there's other things going on in the whole body when we start eating a lot of sugar that may not be as healthy for us. Maybe I'm just holding on to old beliefs in the face of evidence. But if our taste buds get acclimated to so much sugar, then we're seeking it, and then we're getting those empty calories, and then maybe we're not eating the kinds of foods that do deliver us the micronutrients that we need. So I just, I thought that was a little dangerous in here.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're not wrong to have those thoughts. He does round out that information with the fact that there's an issue in nutrition science that if you're looking at an effect of a single nutrient on a single biomarker,
Yes.
It's not an accurate reflection because food is complex and
Synergistic.
we're not just, it's not just the sugar. And it's also, if you're drinking the soda, you're probably also eating
the chips.
eating the chips. And so the ability of a food to affect bodily inflammation must be viewed through the lens of the overall dietary habits and not isolated. I like that he rounded that out, that it's not saying, here, drink all of this sugar, because it's everything in your diet that counts. But it is an interesting finding.
Agreed.
So
yeah, and we probably need to wrap this up in a little bit, but you can tell Kristen and I want to tell you everything we learned in this book because the bottom lines are so fascinating and we talk about them all the time. To me, Kristen, the takeaway here is he does go into discussion of what we can do, and we should eat protein and fiber, and we should have calorie restriction, and we should have colorful plates full of vegetables and fruits that bring color into our diet, and we should restrict or eliminate ultra-processed food as a way to go forward. And he had a discussion here about supplements that I found I'd like to talk a little bit more about sometime. For one of the reasons you just mentioned, some of the research is done on solitary supplements, like a single vitamin or nutrient, like zinc alone, when our body incorporates these things synergistically. So it depends on the formulation of the supplement that you're talking about and the production of them and so on and so forth. But he does say you probably are wasting your money with probiotics, or you're wasting your money with this or that. But then he turns around and says you need a probiotic supplement in certain situations. So he reverses his conversation, and I think what we're talking about is individualized approaches.
Exactly. Yeah, I think
that
he
we
was
can't just blanket a statement.
That there's so many different strands of probiotics that we can't just say, oh, here, this is good for everybody. But there is very targeted research that can guide you for exact symptoms, and then it might be beneficial. So you're right. I think it's very much the individualized approach at the end of the day.
Yeah. So do you want to hit another one? I'm going to let you finish any other hot spots that you think we need to.
I would, but for the sake of time, I think it would take me too long to dive into some more of the interesting things.
There are interesting things in here.
Yes. I recommend this book. I like it a lot. I like following him. I think it's very readable. I'd love to have a conversation with somebody about it. So read it and then come talk to me.
Well, I will say one other thing since I brought up the controversy.
Yeah.
He has a really good statement in there about so many people want to throw out research done by the dairy industry, the pharmaceutical industry, because of who conducted the research.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
He did, and he addressed it the way I think it should be addressed. We don't need to eliminate all that research because it can be very good.
Yeah.
What we need to do is look at it and see if they relinquish the rights to publication, those kinds of things. There are things that companies can do, but there's no way nutrition research can continue if it's not funded.
Exactly.
And these food lobbies have the money. And so if they're willing to say, you do the research, and if it shows that we're doing something wrong, we're going to correct it. That's what we all want.
I don't see anything wrong with that.
I don't either. So I would say that was a great thing for him to include in there because often, these corporate funded research things are being discounted. And I've always said, I know people that do research in the food industry, and they're ethical, and they're trying to do a good job. Of course, there may be some pressures from above that say, fake the data, and they leave,
right,
or not. So we don't know. But I think if they put it out there and it's published in a peer-reviewed journal, then we read it, and if we don't agree with it, we write a letter to the editor. And that's why you need to look at the next issue of these journals instead of just the one it's published in, because there is a response from the audience that says, you guys are off base. We've done this work, and we didn't get the same results. Or blah, blah, blah. We did it, and we're right with you on this. Keep going. So that is part of the conversation that often gets left out is people just take it at point of publication rather than what did the audience, the knowledgeable people in their research world think of this work. And they have to read it first to find out. So, okay, that's all I want to say about that.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up because it's important. an important point. Well, I am Kristen Norton, one of the registered dietitians at Well Balanced Nutrition, where we offer nutrition counseling, often covered by insurance. Give us a visit at wellbalancednutrition.com and set up a free Clarity coaching call to see if we're a good fit for you.
And I'm Eleanor Russell at 360health, number 4, letter U.com, focusing on prevention of disease and promotion of health strategies. And I also just want to say, Kristen and I are professionals, and we're trying to stay current with medical and research literature out here. And it's a little bit of an effort for us to do this, but I am so proud of us for reading these books. So I just want to say thank you, Kristen, for being in this with me.
Yeah, thank you. It's very fun. And thank you to our listeners. We would really appreciate it if you followed along, gave us some feedback, because you're part of the reason we do this.
And we love our producer, Tim, who's going to tell us about our bookstore, too.
That's right. You can visit the bookstore to buy any book that we've talked about and some that we will talk about. HealthGeeksPodcast.com. Just go to the bookstore. Everything that you buy through that enables us to continue to produce this podcast that goes over the health books that you want to know the information without actually having to read them sometimes. But anyway, that's for me, not you guys. You should buy the books. I would actually like to buy the books. I just don't want to read them. So, yeah, Health Geeks Book, HealthGeeksPodcast.com.
Bye, y'all.
And opinions stated in this podcast are solely those of the contributors and are not necessarily those of our distributors or hosting company. This podcast is copyrighted, and no part can be reproduced without the express written consent of Kristen and Eleanor.